A flight attendant looked at an old sweater and called security, but she had no idea the airline CEO was watching from just one row away. "You look homeless." Those 3 words echoed through the first-class cabin as a 63-year-old black woman sat quietly in the seat she had paid for with her own savings. Moments later, security escorted Evelyn Brooks to the back of the plane, while dozens of passengers watched in silence. No one defended her. No one questioned the accusation. But hidden beneath a baseball cap in seat 2A, one passenger saw everything. Every insult, every assumption, every act of humiliation. What the crew didn't know was that the man silently watching wasn't just another traveler. And by the time this flight landed in Chicago, a shocking truth would expose the cost of prejudice, the price of silence, and the extraordinary dignity of a woman who refused to let cruelty change who she was. Rain streaked across the tall glass windows of O'Hare International Airport, turning the Chicago skyline beyond into a blur of gray and silver. The morning crowd moved through Terminal 3 in waves, business travelers rolling sleek carry-ons, families herding sleepy children, airport workers carrying coffee cups and clipboards as another day began. Evelyn Brooks walked through it all at her own pace. She was 63 years old, and she had long ago learned that rushing rarely solved anything. Her cream-colored sweater had been washed so many times that the fabric had softened into something almost silky. A brown leather bag hung from her shoulder, its edges worn smooth from years of use. The bag wasn't expensive. It wasn't fashionable. But Evelyn loved it. Every scratch on the leather carried a memory. She paused near a window overlooking the runway and smiled faintly as she watched a plane taxi through the rain. For a moment, she could hardly believe she was really doing this. First class. The words still felt strange, not because she thought she didn't deserve it, but because she had spent most of her life making sure everyone else came first. Children, neighbors, friends, strangers. There had never been much money left over for Evelyn Brooks, yet somehow, over the past several months, she had managed to save enough. A little here, a little there. Skipping restaurant meals, postponing purchases, setting aside every spare dollar. And today she was flying to celebrate her son's birthday. For the first time in her life, she had purchased a first-class seat. Seat 1D. She smiled again as she checked the boarding pass inside her purse. Everything was in order. Everything. Or so she thought. A boarding announcement echoed through the terminal. Passengers for Skybridge Airways Flight 271 to Chicago were invited to begin boarding. Evelyn joined the line. People shuffled forward. The gate agent scanned her pass without hesitation. A green light flashed. "Enjoy your flight, ma'am." "Thank you, sweetheart." The young woman smiled. Evelyn stepped onto the jet bridge. The smell of rain faded behind her. Moments later, she entered the aircraft. Warm cabin lighting glowed softly overhead. First class stretched before her. Wide leather seats, fresh blankets, polished wood accents, quiet conversations. The kind of place she had only seen in travel magazines. She found seat 1D, her seat. A small smile appeared on her face. She carefully placed her bag beneath the seat in front of her. Then she settled into the chair. For a few seconds, she simply sat there, enjoying it. 38 years of hard work, thousands of meals served at community kitchens, countless nights worrying about bills, countless mornings getting up before sunrise. And now, finally, one small gift to herself. She folded her hands in her lap. Outside, rain tapped softly against the window. Then a shadow fell across her seat. "Ma'am," the voice was sharp enough to cut through the cabin noise. Evelyn looked up. A blonde woman stood beside her. Perfect hair, perfect makeup, perfect uniform. Her name tag read, Lauren Mitchell, lead flight attendant. Lauren's eyes moved slowly across Evelyn's sweater, her shoes, her bag, her reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. Something shifted in her expression. Not confusion, not curiosity. Judgment. "May I see your boarding pass?" Lauren asked. Evelyn handed it over. Lauren examined it. Once, twice, then a third time. Her eyebrows tightened. "This can't be right." Evelyn blinked. "Excuse me?" Lauren looked at the pass again, then back at Evelyn. "This seat belongs to a first-class passenger." The words hung in the air. Evelyn stared at her. "I am a first-class passenger." Lauren's smile appeared. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind people used when they had already decided they were right. "I'll need to verify this." She turned and walked away. Several passengers nearby glanced over. A businessman sitting across the aisle looked up briefly before returning to his tablet. A woman in a navy blazer watched quietly. Nobody said anything. Evelyn remained calm. Surely this would be sorted out. After all, she had purchased the ticket herself 3 months ago. There was nothing to discuss. A few minutes later, Lauren returned. Only now she was no longer smiling. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step aside." The cabin grew noticeably quieter. Evelyn looked up. "I'm sorry?" "There appears to be an issue with your seat assignment." "There isn't." Lauren crossed her arms. "I'm afraid there is." Evelyn reached into her purse. "I have my confirmation email." "That won't be necessary." "I have the receipt." "That won't be necessary either." Evelyn's brow furrowed. Then what exactly is the issue? Lauren leaned slightly closer. Her voice lowered. But not enough. Several passengers still heard every word. "The issue is that this seat is reserved for someone who actually paid for it." A chill moved through the cabin. Evelyn stared at her. For a moment she thought she must have misunderstood. Then she saw Lauren's eyes, and she understood perfectly. "You think I didn't buy this ticket?" Lauren didn't answer. She didn't need to. The answer was written all over her face. Evelyn sat a little straighter. "Yes, I did." Lauren sighed dramatically. "Ma'am, I've worked first class for 15 years. She looked at Evelyn's sweater again, then at the old leather bag, then at her shoes. "I know what first-class passengers look like." The businessman across the aisle chuckled quietly. A couple seated near the window exchanged glances. Nobody spoke. Not one person. Evelyn felt something heavy settle in her chest. Not surprise. She had experienced this before. Different places, different faces, same assumptions, the same silent judgment, the same message. "You don't belong here." Lauren straightened. "I need you to gather your things." "No." The word came out calmly, firmly. Lauren looked stunned. "No? No." Evelyn met her gaze. "I paid for this seat." Lauren's expression hardened. Around them, more passengers were now openly watching. The woman in the navy blazer shifted uncomfortably. A young flight attendant standing near the galley looked away. Lauren pressed a button on the intercom. "Security assistance requested in first class." The announcement echoed through the cabin. Several passengers sat up straighter. Evelyn closed her eyes briefly, then opened them again. Still calm, still composed, still dignified. But deep inside, something hurt. Not because of the seat, not because of first class, because she knew exactly what was happening, and everyone else knew it too. Yet nobody moved, nobody spoke, Nobody stood beside her. Near row 2A, a man wearing a gray hoodie slowly turned his head. A baseball cap shadowed most of his face. He had been quiet since boarding, almost invisible, but now his eyes were fixed on Lauren. Watching. Listening. Remembering. Every word. Every expression. Every decision. And as airport security entered the aircraft, Evelyn Brooks had no way of knowing that the quiet man in seat 2A was about to change the course of everyone's lives, including his own. But that part of the story comes later. To understand why what happened on that plane mattered so much, you have to understand who Evelyn Brooks really was. 3 hours earlier, before the rain-soaked runways, before the accusations, before anyone suggested she didn't belong in first class, Evelyn had been standing on the front porch of a small brick house on Chicago's South Side. The neighborhood wasn't glamorous. Most of the houses were decades old. The sidewalks were cracked in places. A few corner stores had metal security grates over the windows. People worked hard there. People watched out for one another. And for nearly 40 years, Evelyn Brooks had been one of the people everyone trusted. The morning air had been cold enough to make her pull her sweater tighter around her shoulders as she stepped outside carrying a small trash bag. The streetlights were still glowing faintly. Across the road, old Mr. Henderson was already sweeping leaves from his sidewalk. He raised a hand. "Morning, Miss Evelyn?"
Morning.
She smiled.
It's a beautiful
"Morning,
day
Frank.
here.
Yes.
You headed out today?
Good morning to you.
I am.
too.
That birthday trip?" She nodded. The old man grinned. "About time you did something nice for yourself." Evelyn laughed softly. "I suppose so." As she continued toward the curb, another voice called out, "Miss Evelyn!" A young woman hurried across the street carrying a toddler on her hip. Tasha Reed. One of dozens of children Evelyn had watched grow up. Except Tasha wasn't a child anymore. Now she had children of her own. The little boy waved excitedly. "Grandma Evelyn!" Evelyn's face lit up. She bent down and hugged him. "Look at you, getting bigger every time I see you." Tasha smiled. "He wanted to say goodbye before your trip." The boy wrapped tiny arms around Evelyn's neck. "You bring me a present?" She chuckled. "I'll see what I can do." Tasha shook her head. "You spoil everybody." Evelyn stood slowly. "No. Just the people I love." That had always been her problem, at least according to friends. She gave too much, too often, too freely. Years earlier, after her husband Robert died from cancer, several people told her she needed to start putting herself first. She had tried, for about 2 weeks. Then someone needed help paying a utility bill. A neighbor's son needed school supplies. A family down the street needed groceries. And somehow, Evelyn always found herself helping, even when she barely had enough herself. Inside her house, photographs covered nearly every wall. Pictures of church events, community dinners, neighborhood cookouts, children holding graduation certificates, families smiling beside Christmas trees, a lifetime of ordinary people whose lives had crossed hers. The largest photograph sat on the mantel above the fireplace. It showed Evelyn standing beside a tall young man in a navy suit. Both were smiling. Robert had taken that picture years ago. Before the cancer. Before the hospital visits. Before everything changed. Evelyn stopped briefly in front of it. Her fingers touched the frame. "Wish you were here today," she whispered. The house remained silent, but somehow she still felt him. She always did. After 38 years of marriage, some people never really leave. They simply become part of the walls around you, part of the memories, part of the quiet. Her phone buzzed. A text message. "Happy birthday weekend, Mama." Can't wait to see you. Love you. Evelyn smiled immediately. Her son. The one thing in her life she was proudest of. She typed back. Love you too, baby. See you soon. A second later, another message appeared. Did you really buy first class? She laughed out loud. Yes, still can't believe it. A reply came almost instantly. Good. You deserve it. She stared at the screen for a moment. Her eyes grew slightly damp. Because the truth was, she almost hadn't bought the ticket. $2,400 was a lot of money. For someone who had spent most of her life counting every dollar. For months, she had debated it. Then one evening, she remembered something Robert used to tell her. One day, you're going to stop waiting for permission to enjoy your own life. Maybe he had been right. Maybe that day had finally arrived. An hour later, Evelyn locked her front door and rolled her suitcase down the front steps. The old leather bag rested on her shoulder. The same bag former students had given her when she retired from community service work. The edges were worn now. The leather faded, but she treasured it. As she loaded her suitcase into a rideshare vehicle, another neighbor called from across the street. Have fun, Miss Evelyn. I will. Don't spend all your money. She laughed. Too late. The driver pulled away. The neighborhood slowly disappeared behind her. Brick houses, corner stores, churches, basketball courts, the places that had shaped her life. As downtown Chicago approached, rain began tapping against the windshield. The city lights reflected across wet pavement. For a moment, Evelyn simply watched, thinking about Robert, thinking about her son, thinking about how strange life could be. A little girl from a poor family, a woman who spent decades helping strangers, a widow who still clipped coupons, and now she was flying first class. The thought made her smile again. She had no idea that before reaching the airport, she would encounter a stranger whose life would briefly intersect with hers, and she certainly had no idea that one small act of kindness was already being witnessed by eyes far more important than she could possibly imagine. As the rideshare vehicle approached the airport district, traffic slowed near a bus terminal just outside O'Hare. Evelyn glanced through the rain-streaked window. Then she noticed something that made her sit forward immediately. Someone was lying on a bench, motionless, alone, out in the cold rain. And without hesitation, Evelyn Brooks made a decision that would set the next chapter of her story into motion. Sir, stop the car for a second, please. The rideshare driver glanced into the rearview mirror. In this weather? Please. The driver pulled toward the curb beside the bus terminal. Rain tapped steadily against the roof. People hurried past beneath umbrellas. Most never looked toward the bench. Why would they? Everyone had somewhere to be. Everyone had a reason not to stop. Evelyn reached for the door handle. The driver frowned. Ma'am, you don't know that person. I know he's lying in the rain. Before the driver could answer, she stepped outside. Cold wind immediately pushed against her sweater. The smell of wet concrete filled the air. Water dripped from the edge of the terminal roof. The man on the bench looked to be in his 70s. His gray beard was soaked. His coat was thin. One sleeve had been repaired several times with mismatched thread. His hands trembled. At first, Evelyn thought he might be asleep. Then she noticed how pale he looked. Sir? No answer. She moved closer. Sir, are you all right? His eyes opened slowly, confused, exhausted, embarrassed. The look people wear when life has knocked them down so many times they stop expecting help. I'm fine, he said automatically. Evelyn smiled gently. No, you're not. The old man attempted a laugh, It came out as a cough. "I'll be all right." She noticed a small military pin attached to his coat, a faded American flag. Beneath it, another insignia. "Army." Her expression softened. "You served?" The man nodded. "Long time ago." "What's your name?" "Thomas." "Evelyn." They shook hands. His fingers were ice cold. A few feet away, travelers continued rushing toward the terminal entrance. Some looked briefly at the pair. Most didn't. Rainwater collected in puddles around the bench. Thomas tried sitting straighter. "I don't need charity." "I didn't offer charity." That earned the smallest smile. For the first time, he actually looked at her. She reminded him of teachers, church volunteers, the kind of people who still remembered your name, the kind that had become increasingly rare. Evelyn glanced toward a nearby diner tucked beside the terminal parking lot. Its neon open sign glowed through the rain. "Have you eaten breakfast?" Thomas hesitated. That hesitation answered the question. "No." "Come on. I don't have money. I didn't ask if you did." He shook his head. "Pride's about all I got left." Evelyn looked directly at him. "My father used to say, pride doesn't keep you warm." Thomas stared for a moment. Then he laughed. A real laugh this time. Weak, but real. 10 minutes later, they sat inside the small diner. Warm air wrapped around them. Coffee machines hissed behind the counter. Country music played softly overhead. The waitress brought menus. Thomas immediately looked away from the prices. Evelyn noticed. Without saying a word, she ordered for both of them. Eggs, toast, coffee, pancakes, the kind of breakfast that smelled like comfort. Thomas watched her carefully. "Why are you doing this?" She stirred cream into her coffee. "Because somebody should." He looked down. For a moment, neither spoke. Rain streamed down the diner windows. Cars splashed through puddles outside. Finally, Thomas cleared his throat. "Lost my apartment last year." Evelyn listened. "Medical bills." He shrugged. "My wife passed 2 years ago." The words landed heavily. Evelyn understood that kind of loss. Far too well. "Mine too," she said quietly. Thomas looked up. "You lost your husband?" 3 years ago." For a few seconds, the noise of the diner faded into the background. Two strangers. Two people carrying grief. Recognizing it in each other. Thomas nodded slowly. "I'm sorry." "So am I." Their breakfasts arrived. Steam rose from the plates. Thomas stared at the food as if he couldn't quite believe it was his. Then he began eating. Not quickly, not greedily, just carefully, as though trying to remember what dignity felt like. Outside the diner window, a black SUV rolled into the parking lot. Expensive, immaculate. The kind of vehicle that looked out of place beside a bus terminal. The driver remained inside. The rear passenger door opened. A tall white man stepped out. Mid-50s, tailored overcoat, silver watch. The sort of person financial magazines liked putting on covers. His name was Charles Whitmore. Most people in Chicago knew it. Investment firms, hotels, technology companies, real estate developments. His business empire stretched across half the country. Charles wasn't supposed to be there. A meeting cancellation had changed his morning schedule. Traffic had redirected his route. A simple accident of timing. Nothing more. Yet when he looked through the diner window, something caught his attention. An older black woman. A homeless veteran. Breakfast. Conversation. Kindness without performance. No cameras. No audience. No social media post. just genuine concern. Charles watched. His driver followed his gaze. Know them? No. Then why are we stopping? Charles didn't answer immediately. Instead, he kept watching. Thomas laughed at something Evelyn said. For the first time since Charles had noticed him, the veteran looked happy. Not fixed, not rescued, just seen. That seemed to affect Charles more than he expected. Inside the diner, Evelyn reached into her purse. Thomas noticed immediately. You've already done enough. Nonsense. She placed a few bills beneath the receipt folder. Then she stood. Her flight schedule was growing tight. She needed to leave. Outside, the rain had become heavier. Wind pushed sheets of water across the parking lot. Thomas followed her to the entrance. You don't have to keep helping me. Evelyn studied him. Then she slowly unwound, knitted scarf from around her neck. Dark blue. Handmade. Old. Thomas immediately shook his head. No. It's freezing. You need that. She smiled. I'll be inside an airport. Evelyn, you need it more. Before he could protest again, she wrapped the scarf around his neck herself. The gesture was so simple, so natural, like a mother sending a child out into winter. Thomas's eyes filled unexpectedly. Nobody had done something like that for him in a very long time, maybe years. Thank you. Evelyn squeezed his shoulder. Take care of yourself. You too. Then she turned and walked toward her waiting car. The rain soaked her sweater almost immediately. She didn't seem to notice. Back inside the SUV, Charles Whitmore watched the entire exchange. The scarf, the smile, the gratitude, everything. The driver finally spoke. Most people would have kept walking. Charles nodded. Most people would have. He glanced at his watch. Important meetings waited downtown. Board members, investors, people who measured success in numbers. Yet somehow the image of that woman giving away her only scarf stayed with him. Interesting, he murmured. What is? Charles looked through the rain-streaked glass as Evelyn climbed into the rideshare vehicle. Some people spend their lives trying to look important. The driver waited. Charles continued. And some people never realize how important they already are. The SUV pulled away. So did Evelyn's car. Neither knew the other's name. Neither knew their paths would cross again in a way neither could possibly imagine. As the airport came into view ahead, Evelyn rubbed her hands together and smiled. Helping Thomas had delayed her schedule. She might have to hurry through security, but she didn't regret stopping. Not for a second. Because that was who she was, and because somewhere deep inside, she still believed something most people had forgotten. That kindness mattered, even when nobody was watching. What she didn't know was that someone had been watching. And before this day was over, that small act of kindness would become one more piece of a story that was already moving toward a collision no one aboard Skybridge Airways Flight 271 was prepared for, especially Lauren Mitchell. The security officer stopped beside seat 1D. He was a broad-shouldered man in his 40s with tired eyes and a badge clipped to his jacket. His name tag read, Davis. He glanced from Lauren to Evelyn, then back to Lauren. What seems to be the issue? Lauren answered before Evelyn could speak. This passenger is occupying a first-class seat she isn't authorized to use. The words came out smoothly. Practiced, confident, like she had already won. Officer Davis looked at Evelyn. Ma'am? Evelyn lifted her boarding pass. My ticket is valid. I paid for this seat. I can show you my receipt. Lauren folded her arms. That won't be necessary. Officer Davis hesitated. Only briefly. The pause was so small most people wouldn't have noticed it. But Evelyn did. For 1 second, he looked uncertain. For 1 second, he looked like a man who knew there might be more to the story. Then Lauren spoke again. Sir, we're already delaying departure. The hesitation vanished. The officer nodded. Ma'am, I'm going to ask you to come with me. Silence settled across first class. The businessman across the aisle avoided eye contact. The woman in the navy blazer stared at her folded hands. Someone near row 3 pretended to read a magazine. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Evelyn slowly stood. Not because she agreed, not because she was afraid, but because she had spent her entire life understanding something painful. Sometimes dignity means refusing to become the spectacle people expect. She reached beneath the seat and pulled out her leather bag. The familiar strap slid across her shoulder. For a moment, her hand rested on the worn leather, the gift from former students, the reminder of a life that mattered, a life Lauren knew nothing about. As Evelyn stepped into the aisle, her reading glasses slipped from the chain around her neck. They hit the carpet softly, landing near a passenger's expensive shoes. The businessman looked down, saw them, then looked away. He didn't pick them up. Neither did anyone else. Evelyn bent carefully and retrieved them herself. The movement hurt more than she wanted to admit. Not physically, emotionally. Because in that tiny moment, she saw exactly how alone she was. Officer Davis led her toward the curtain separating first class from the rest of the aircraft. The walk felt longer than it actually was. Every face seemed frozen. Every eye seemed to follow her. A woman being removed from a seat she had paid for. A woman being told she didn't belong. And nobody willing to challenge it. Near seat 2A, the man in the gray hoodie watched silently. His face remained hidden beneath the cap, but his eyes never left Evelyn. Not for a second. As she passed him, something unexpected happened. Their eyes met. Only briefly. A heartbeat. Maybe 2. Yet there was something in that look. Not pity, not curiosity. Recognition. As if he saw her. Really saw her. Then she was past him. Past the curtain. Past first class. Past the place Lauren had decided wasn't for her. The economy cabin was crowded. Families, students, workers, vacationers. People settling into ordinary seats for an ordinary flight. Seat 38B, middle seat. No window, no aisle. Just the narrow space between two strangers. Officer Davis stopped. This will be your seat. Evelyn nodded quietly. He looked uncomfortable, almost apologetic. But he said nothing else. A moment later, he was gone. The plane door closed. Back in first class, Lauren exhaled slowly, satisfied. She adjusted the pillow on seat 1D, straightened the blanket, smoothed the armrest, as if she were erasing evidence, as if Evelyn Brooks had never been there. Ryan stood nearby holding a service tray, 26 years old, 2 years into the job, and feeling sick. You know she had a valid boarding pass, he said quietly. Lauren didn't even look at him. You'll understand someday. No, I don't think I will. That finally got her attention. Lauren turned. You think I made a mistake? Ryan hesitated. The answer sat on the tip of his tongue. Yes. But fear got there first. Fear of losing hours. Fear of losing routes. Fear of losing the career he'd worked hard to build. So instead, he said nothing. Lauren smirked. That's what I thought. She walked away. Ryan watched her disappear into the galley, then looked back toward economy, toward row 38, toward the woman who had just been humiliated in front of an entire cabin, and hated himself a little for staying quiet. In seat 38B, Evelyn folded her hands in her lap, exactly the way she had done 1,000 times before. The teenager beside her had headphones on. Music leaked faintly into the air. The man by the window was already asleep. Neither knew what had happened. Neither knew they were sitting beside a woman who had just lost something far more important than a seat. Across the aisle, a young black college student looked over. She had witnessed everything. Every word, every glance, every silent passenger. She reached into her backpack and pulled out a bottle of water. "Ma'am?" Evelyn looked up. The young woman smiled gently. "Thought you might want this." For the first time since leaving first class, Evelyn smiled back. "Thank you, baby." The student nodded. "It's not right what happened." The words were quiet, barely above a whisper, but they landed like warmth. Because after 30 minutes of silence, someone had finally acknowledged the truth. Someone had finally said it. Evelyn twisted the cap off the bottle. "Thank you." The young woman returned to her book. Nothing dramatic, nothing heroic. Just simple kindness. The same kind Evelyn had shown Thomas that morning. The same kind the world never seemed to have enough of. Far ahead in first class, Lauren began preparing beverage service. She felt good, confident, certain. The problem had been solved. The standards had been protected. The cabin looked exactly the way she thought it should. What she didn't know was that the man in seat 2A had not looked away. What she didn't know was that he remembered every word she had spoken. And what she definitely didn't know was that before this flight reached Chicago, a single photograph hidden inside Evelyn's old leather bag would begin unraveling everything, including Lauren's carefully built certainty about who belonged in first class and who didn't. At 37,000 feet, the world outside looked peaceful. The clouds stretched endlessly beneath the aircraft like a blanket of white silk. Sunlight broke through the gray weather they had left behind in Chicago. Inside the cabin, however, peace was much harder to find. Evelyn sat quietly in seat 38B. The bottle of water rested on her tray table. The young college student across the aisle had returned to studying. The man by the window continued sleeping. The teenager beside her remained lost inside his headphones. Life on the plane had resumed, or at least it appeared to. But Evelyn could still feel the weight of what had happened. Not because of the seat. Not because of first class. Because humiliation lingers, even after the moment has passed, especially when nobody stands beside you. She looked down at her hands, the same hands that had served meals at community kitchens, the same hands that had comforted grieving families, the same hands that had held her husband's during his final weeks. Now they rested quietly in her lap, still steady, still composed. Yet beneath that calm exterior, something hurt. Not anger, disappointment. The kind that settles deep. The kind that comes from realizing how quickly people can decide who you are without ever asking your name. A few rows ahead, a little girl began crying. She couldn't have been older than 6. Her mother looked exhausted. The child clutched the armrests as turbulence gently rocked the plane. "I don't like it, Mommy." "It's okay, sweetheart." "No, it's not." Tears filled the girl's eyes. The mother looked helpless. She had already tried everything. Stories, snacks, reassurance. Nothing was working. Evelyn watched quietly. Then she smiled. "Some things never leave you. Years spent helping people become part of who you are. She leaned slightly toward the child. Excuse me. The mother turned. I'm sorry to bother you. You aren't. Evelyn pointed toward the window. Do you know what clouds remind me of? The little girl sniffled. What? Cotton candy? The child frowned. No, they don't. Evelyn nodded seriously. They absolutely do. The girl looked outside, then back at Evelyn, then outside again. Slowly, despite herself, she smiled. Evelyn lowered her voice. When I was your age, I thought angels made them. The little girl giggled. The sound was small, but it changed everything. For the next few minutes, Evelyn told stories. Simple ones, funny ones, nothing special, just enough to distract a frightened child. Eventually, the tears disappeared. The girl relaxed. Her mother looked relieved. Thank you. Evelyn shrugged. Kids always make more sense than adults. The woman laughed. It was the first light moment Evelyn had experienced all morning. A few nearby passengers noticed, including the college student, including several people who had witnessed her removal, including Ryan. Standing near the galley, watching. The more Ryan observed Evelyn, the worse he felt, because she wasn't behaving like someone bitter, or angry, or entitled. She was behaving exactly like the kind of person Lauren claimed didn't belong, and somehow that made everything even harder to justify. Back in first class, Lauren prepared beverage service. She moved confidently through the aisle. Coffee, champagne, sparkling water. The familiar routine helped calm her. She preferred certainty, rules, categories, order. The world made sense when everything stayed where she believed it belonged. She stopped beside a businessman. Another coffee, sir? Please. As she poured, her eyes drifted briefly toward the empty seat. 1D still vacant, still unused. The sight reassured her. Proof she had fixed the problem. At least that was what she told herself. A few minutes later, Ryan entered the galley carrying supplies. Lauren glanced at him. You look miserable. Ryan didn't answer. You need thicker skin. Still nothing. Lauren sighed. You can't survive this job if every passenger complaint bothers you. It wasn't a complaint. She turned. What was it then? Ryan hesitated. The truth sat in his chest like a stone. Before he could answer, turbulence shook the aircraft slightly. A storage compartment rattled. A stack of napkins slid sideways. The moment passed. Lauren walked away. Ryan exhaled slowly. Then something caught his attention. A flight attendant from economy approached carrying a leather bag. Passenger in 38B asked if we could move this for her. Ryan recognized it immediately. Evelyn's bag. The worn brown leather. The faded stitching. The same bag she had carried from first class. The attendant set it on a counter while reorganizing storage space. A moment later, the aircraft shifted again. The bag tipped sideways. Its flap loosened. Several items spilled partially out. A paperback novel, reading glasses case, a folded church bulletin, and a photograph. Ryan instinctively picked it up. At first, he only meant to place it back. Then he looked at the image. His eyes narrowed. The photograph showed Evelyn, smiling, dressed in an elegant black gown, standing beside a younger man. Tall, confident, expensive suit. A grand ballroom glittered behind them. Crystal chandeliers, white tablecloths, gold decorations, some sort of charity gala. Ryan stared. The image felt completely different from the assumptions everyone had made about her. Not because of wealth, but because of belonging. In the photo, Evelyn looked completely at home. Proud, loved, important, as though she belonged anywhere she chose to stand. "Who is that?" another attendant asked. Ryan shrugged. "No idea." Yet something about the man looked strangely familiar. Not familiar enough to identify, just enough to bother him. He flipped the photograph over. Nothing written on the back. Only a date from 3 years earlier. Ryan slid it back into the bag, but the image stayed in his mind. Back in economy, Evelyn reached beneath her seat. Her fingers searched for the bag. When she realized it wasn't there, concern flickered across her face. Not panic, just concern. The photograph was inside. One of her favorites, a memory she carried everywhere. A memory connected to someone she loved more than anything in the world. She pressed the call button. Moments later, an economy flight attendant arrived. "Can I help you, ma'am?" My bag was moved. The woman nodded. "I'll check." "Thank you." As the attendant walked away, Evelyn settled back again. Across the aisle, the college student glanced up from her textbook. "Important bag?" Evelyn smiled softly. "Very." The student hesitated. "Family?" For a moment, Evelyn looked toward the clouds outside. Then she nodded. "Family. Nothing more. Nothing less." Several rows forward, the man in seat 2A remained silent. He had declined lunch, declined coffee, declined everything. Most passengers barely remembered he was there. That was exactly how he preferred it. His baseball cap remained low, his expression unreadable. But when a flight attendant passed by carrying Evelyn's bag toward the front galley, his eyes followed it. And for the first time since boarding, a faint change appeared in his face. Recognition. Only for a second. Then it vanished. No one noticed. No one except the businessman seated across the aisle. And even he couldn't quite figure out why. Outside, the clouds rolled endlessly beneath the wings. Inside, tiny pieces of a much larger puzzle were quietly moving into place. A photograph, an old leather bag, a silent observer, a frightened child comforted by the very woman who had been humiliated. And somewhere near the front of the aircraft, Ryan Sullivan found himself staring at that photograph one more time. Because the more he looked at it, the more certain he became of one thing. The man standing beside Evelyn Brooks was someone important, very important. The only question was why nobody on this plane knew it yet. Ryan slipped the photograph back into Evelyn's leather bag and closed the flap carefully. For several seconds, he stood alone in the galley, staring at nothing. The image refused to leave his mind. The elegant ballroom, the crystal chandeliers, the expensive suit, the proud smile on Evelyn's face. None of it matched the picture Lauren had painted. None of it matched the assumptions that had filled the cabin that morning. Most of all, none of it matched the way Evelyn had been treated. A voice interrupted his thoughts. "Ryan." He turned. Lauren stood in the galley doorway. "Drink service isn't going to finish itself." He nodded. "Sorry." She studied him for a moment. "You need to stop thinking about that woman." Ryan looked away. Lauren continued. "Passengers get moved all the time." "Not like that." The words escaped before he could stop them. Lauren's expression hardened. "What does that mean?" Ryan immediately regretted speaking. Years of workplace instinct kicked in. Smile. Stay quiet. Avoid conflict. The same survival habits millions of people carried into jobs every day. "Nothing," he said. Lauren stared another second before walking away, but the conversation left a sour taste in Ryan's mouth. because deep down he knew the truth. Passengers did get moved, but not like that. Not after showing proof, not after offering receipts, not after being publicly judged before anyone checked the facts. Back in first class, seat 1A remained occupied by a woman named Claire Reynolds, 61 years old, corporate attorney, partner at one of Chicago's most respected law firms. The kind of person whose opinion carried weight in boardrooms. The kind of person who negotiated million-dollar agreements before lunch. The kind of person who rarely lost arguments. And yet, she had lost one this morning. Not out loud, inside herself. The untouched glass of sparkling water sat beside her seat. She stared through the window without seeing the clouds. Instead, she saw Evelyn, standing quietly, holding her boarding pass, trying to explain, trying to be heard. Claire remembered every second. The reading glasses, the worn leather bag, the humiliation, the silence, especially the silence, because she had been close enough to stop it, close enough to say something, close enough to ask a simple question. Did anyone verify her ticket? That was all. One sentence, one interruption, one act of courage. Instead, she had looked away, just like everyone else. Claire closed her eyes. A memory surfaced. 35 years earlier, a courtroom in St. Louis. She had been 26, young, talented, one of only a few women in the firm. A senior partner had taken credit for her work during an important case. Everyone knew it. Nobody spoke. Not one person. She remembered driving home in tears that night, remembered promising herself she would never stand quietly while someone else was treated unfairly. Yet here she was, 35 years later, doing exactly that. The realization settled heavily in her chest. Across the aisle, the businessman who had laughed earlier was watching a movie. He seemed perfectly relaxed, perfectly comfortable, as though nothing unusual had happened. Claire envied him for a moment. Not because he was right, because ignorance seemed easier than guilt. Far easier. Meanwhile, back in row 38, Evelyn sat peacefully beside the sleeping passenger. The college student across the aisle had introduced herself during a quiet moment. Jasmine. Evelyn. They exchanged smiles. Nothing more. Yet something about Jasmine reminded Evelyn of dozens of young people she had mentored over the years. Bright, hopeful, trying to build a future. The kind of young person who still believed the world could improve. Evelyn liked that. For several minutes, neither spoke. Then Jasmine finally asked the question she had been carrying. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. How are you staying so calm?" Evelyn smiled gently. The question seemed almost impossible to answer, because the truth wasn't simple. It had taken years, decades, pain, experience, loss. She looked out the window before speaking. When you've lived long enough, you learn something. Jasmine waited. People can only tell you who they think you are. She turned back toward the young woman. They can't tell you who you actually are. Jasmine considered that. But doesn't it hurt? The answer came immediately. Yes. No hesitation. No pretending. No false wisdom. Just honesty. Of course it hurts. Jasmine nodded slowly. Because she understood. More than Evelyn realized. As a young black woman herself, she knew what assumptions felt like. She knew what it meant to enter a room and feel judged before speaking. Different circumstances, same wound. Evelyn smiled again. But pain doesn't get to decide who I become. The words lingered. Jasmine would remember them long after this flight ended. Several rows ahead, another passenger had been quietly observing everything. An older man reading a newspaper, retired school principal, Name, Walter Green. He hadn't spoken during the confrontation either. At the time, he told himself the crew must know something he didn't. Now he wasn't so sure. The more he thought about it, the worse he felt. Because the woman in row 38 reminded him of teachers he had worked beside for decades. Patient people, good people, people who spent their lives helping others. He folded the newspaper and sighed. Across the plane, guilt was spreading. Not loudly, quietly. Person by person, seat by seat, like a slow-moving shadow. The incident itself had lasted only minutes, but its impact remained. That was the thing about public humiliation. It didn't end when the moment ended. It lingered. Inside everyone who witnessed it, especially those who did nothing. Near the front of the aircraft, Lauren continued her duties. Coffee, refills, meal trays, professional smiles. Everything looked normal, but something felt different. Passengers who had chatted comfortably earlier were quieter now. Eye contact lasted longer. Conversations felt strained. Even she could sense it. Though she refused to acknowledge why, part of her still believed she had done the right thing, or at least convinced herself she did. That belief had protected her for years. People like Lauren rarely woke up deciding to be cruel. Instead, they built stories inside their heads. Stories about who belonged, who mattered, who fit. And after enough years, those stories began to feel like facts. Facts are dangerous when they aren't true, especially when authority gives them power. The aircraft hit a pocket of light turbulence. Nothing serious, just enough to make cups rattle. Passengers looked up briefly, then settled again. Near seat 2A, the quiet man in the gray hoodie finally moved, only slightly. He glanced down at his phone. One message waited on the screen, a simple notification. No name attached, no explanation, just 3 words. Request in progress. He read it, locked the screen, and returned the phone to his pocket. The businessman across the aisle noticed, again, and again found himself wondering who this man actually was, because there was something unusual about him, something impossible to define. The confidence, the calm, the complete lack of concern. Most passengers wanted attention. This man seemed determined to avoid it. And yet somehow that made him stand out even more. Back in row 38, Evelyn finally received her leather bag. The economy attendant returned it with an apologetic smile. Sorry about the delay. No problem. Evelyn checked inside. The photograph was still there. Safe. She touched the edge of it briefly. A private smile appeared on her face, then disappeared. Jasmine noticed. Someone important? Evelyn looked down at the photograph. For a moment, her eyes softened. Warmer than before. Brighter. The look of a mother thinking about her child. Very important, she said quietly. Then she slipped the picture back inside. Neither woman noticed the man in seat 2A watching from several rows ahead, nor did they realize that the answers everyone was searching for were sitting only a few feet away. Waiting, silent, patient, and moving steadily toward a moment that would force everyone on Skybridge Airways Flight 271 to confront a difficult question. Not what Lauren did, not who Evelyn was, but what kind of person they had chosen to become when they watched it happen and said nothing. The plane hummed steadily through the afternoon sky. Most passengers had settled into the rhythm of the flight. Movies flickered on screens. Coffee cups sat half-empty on tray tables. Outside the windows, sunlight spilled across endless clouds. Everything looked peaceful. Yet beneath that calm surface, tension continued to build. Ryan felt it. Claire felt it. Even some of the passengers who had said nothing earlier could feel it. A story had begun in first class, and somehow everyone sensed it wasn't over. Not yet. Near the front of the aircraft, the man in seat 2A remained almost invisible. He had declined lunch, declined snacks, declined drinks. He hadn't opened a laptop, hadn't watched a movie, hadn't spoken to anyone. Most passengers couldn't remember hearing his voice at all. That was intentional. For years, Marcus Whitmore had learned something about power. Real power rarely announced itself. It watched. It listened. It waited. He sat quietly, staring out the window. The reflection in the glass showed a tired face, a baseball cap pulled low, a gray hoodie. Nothing remarkable. Nothing that suggested he controlled one of the largest airline companies in the country. Nothing that suggested he had spent the entire flight watching his own employee humiliate his mother. His jaw tightened slightly, only slightly, because anger was easy, control was harder, and Marcus had spent a lifetime learning control. His phone vibrated once, a discreet notification. He slipped it from his pocket. A secure company message. The sender's name didn't appear. Only a short line. Crew manifest retrieved. Passenger incident logs retrieved. Review available. Marcus stared at the message, then locked the screen again. Across the aisle, a businessman noticed. The same businessman who had laughed earlier. He frowned. Something about the interaction felt strange. Who requested crew records during a flight? What kind of passenger had access to that information? Before he could think further, Marcus returned the phone to his pocket and folded his arms. The moment disappeared. Yet the businessman couldn't shake the feeling that the quiet man beside him wasn't who he appeared to be. Several rows behind, Claire Reynolds finally pressed her call button. A flight attendant arrived. "Can I help you, ma'am?" Claire hesitated. For the first time all flight, she looked uncertain. "I need to ask something." "Of course." Claire lowered her voice. "The woman who was moved from first class." The attendant immediately looked uncomfortable. Claire noticed. That told her everything. The crew knows there was a problem, don't they? The attendant glanced toward the galley, then back at Claire. "I really can't discuss passenger matters." Claire nodded. "Of course." That was the official answer. The safe answer. The answer everyone seemed to be giving today. She thanked the attendant and watched her walk away. Then Claire stared out the window again. A familiar feeling settled over her. Regret. She had spent her career fighting for people, standing in courtrooms, arguing against injustice, demanding accountability. Yet when the moment arrived on this airplane, she had frozen. The realization hurt, far more than she wanted to admit. Back in row 38, Evelyn sat quietly beside Jasmine. The leather bag rested safely beneath her seat once more. For several minutes, neither woman spoke. Then Jasmine closed her textbook. "Can I ask another question?" Evelyn smiled. "You can ask anything." Jasmine looked embarrassed. "It's probably silly." "Try me." The young woman glanced around the cabin, then leaned closer. "Were you scared?" Evelyn thought about the question, not because she didn't know the answer, because she knew it too well. "Yes." Jasmine seemed surprised by the honesty. Evelyn continued. "People think courage means you're not afraid." She shook her head gently. "It doesn't." "What is it then?" Evelyn looked toward the clouds. "Courage is behaving like yourself, even when fear gives you every reason not to." Jasmine considered that. The words settled somewhere deep inside her, because she had her own fears, student loans, future jobs, the pressure of proving herself, the exhausting feeling of constantly needing to be twice as good. Evelyn seemed to understand all of that without being told. A few rows ahead, an elderly woman struggled to place her oxygen tube properly. The flight had become slightly bumpier. Nothing dangerous, just enough to unsettle nervous travelers. The woman appeared increasingly anxious. Her breathing grew faster. Her husband looked worried. Several passengers glanced over. No one moved. Then Evelyn unbuckled her seatbelt. Jasmine immediately noticed. "Miss Evelyn? I'll be right back." She stepped carefully into the aisle and approached the couple. "Excuse me." The older woman looked up. Her eyes were wide. "I'm okay." The statement sounded unconvincing. Evelyn smiled warmly. "My husband used to get anxious during flights." The woman blinked. "He did?" "Oh, yes." That wasn't entirely true. Robert hadn't feared flying, but Evelyn understood something important. Sometimes people don't need solutions. Sometimes they need company. For several minutes, she sat beside the woman, talking softly, asking simple questions, distracting her from the fear. Slowly, the woman's breathing steadied. Her shoulders relaxed. The panic began to fade. Her husband squeezed Evelyn's hand. "Thank you. You'd do the same for me." The man lowered his eyes. The truth was, he wasn't sure he would have. That realization bothered him. When Evelyn returned to row 38, several nearby passengers watched her differently. Not with pity, with respect. The woman Lauren had treated like a problem kept revealing herself as the kindest person on the plane, and that contrast was becoming harder to ignore. Back in first class, Lauren remained unaware, or perhaps she refused to see it. She continued moving through the cabin with practiced confidence, refilling drinks, collecting trays, maintaining the image she cared so deeply about. Standards, presentation, control. She stopped beside seat 2A. "Sir, are you sure I can't get you anything?" Marcus looked up. For the first time, Lauren saw his eyes clearly. Calm, focused, observant. "No, thank you." His voice was quiet, professional, nothing unusual. Yet something about it made Lauren hesitate. Just for a second. Then she smiled and moved on. Marcus watched her leave. The expression on his face never changed. But inside, another memory surfaced. His mother teaching him as a boy. A tiny apartment. A kitchen table. Bills stacked beside a grocery list. Marcus couldn't have been more than 10. Someone at school had mocked another student for wearing old clothes. Marcus remembered repeating the joke at home. His mother's reaction had been immediate. Not angry, disappointed. She had looked him straight in the eye and said something he never forgot. "You never know what battle someone is fighting." Then she added another sentence, one he carried into adulthood. "The easiest thing in the world is judging people. The hardest thing is understanding them." Marcus stared out the window. 30 years later, those words felt more important than ever. The aircraft shuddered gently through another patch of turbulence. Passengers adjusted in their seats. A few overhead bins rattled. Then calm returned. The captain announced they would begin preparing for descent within the hour. A subtle change moved through the cabin. People checked phones, gathered belongings, prepared to arrive. Only Marcus seemed completely still. Because unlike everyone else, he wasn't preparing for the end of the flight. He was preparing for what happened after it. His phone vibrated one final time. He glanced down. The new message was shorter than the first. Everything confirmed. Marcus stared at the screen, then slowly slipped the phone back into his pocket. Across the aisle, the businessman noticed again, and suddenly an uncomfortable thought entered his mind. What if the quiet man wasn't a passenger at all? What if he was someone far more important? The businessman looked toward Lauren, toward the empty first-class seat, toward the curtain separating the cabins, toward the woman sitting in row 38. For the first time all day, uncertainty replaced confidence, because something was coming. He didn't know what. He didn't know when, but he could feel it. And somewhere deep inside, so could everyone else, including Lauren Mitchell. The only difference was that Lauren still believed she was about to finish another ordinary flight. She had no idea that in less than an hour, the quiet man in seat 2A would stand up, remove his cap, and change everything. The captain's voice echoed through the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be beginning our descent into Chicago shortly. Weather conditions are favorable, and we expect an on-time arrival." The announcement brought movement throughout the aircraft. Laptop screens closed, seatbacks straightened, window shades lifted. Passengers checked messages that had arrived while the plane crossed the Midwest. The end of the flight was approaching. For most people, it meant nothing more than arriving home. For others, it would become a day they never forgot. In row 38, Evelyn Brooks looked out the window. The clouds had begun to break apart. Sunlight spilled across them in brilliant shades of gold and white. Beyond them, the faint outline of Lake Michigan appeared in the distance. Chicago. Almost home. Almost. She should have felt excited. Instead, she felt tired. Not physically. Emotionally. The events of the morning replayed themselves quietly in her mind. Lauren's voice, the stairs, the walk through first class, the silence, especially the silence. That was the part she couldn't stop thinking about. People often remembered cruelty. But what stayed with you longer was the absence of kindness, the empty spaces where courage should have been, the places where someone could have spoken and didn't. She sighed softly. Jasmine glanced over. "You okay?" Evelyn smiled. The same gentle smile she seemed to give everyone. "I'm fine." Jasmine wasn't convinced, but she let it go. Because sometimes people carried pain privately, and because she suspected Evelyn had spent a lifetime protecting others from her burdens. A sudden jolt interrupted the moment. Nothing severe, just a pocket of rough air. The aircraft shifted unexpectedly. Several passengers gasped. Overhead bins rattled. A few cups slid across tray tables. The seatbelt sign illuminated. The plane steadied again. Then another bump followed. Stronger this time. Across the cabin, an elderly woman clutched her armrest. Her breathing immediately changed. Short, rapid, panicked. The man beside her looked alarmed. "Helen?" The woman shook her head. "I can't breathe." Passengers nearby turned. The woman's face had gone pale. Her hands trembled. Fear spread through her expression. Not fear of flying. Something deeper. Something older. The kind of panic that arrives before logic has a chance to intervene. A flight attendant approached. "Ma'am, can you take a deep breath for me?" The woman tried. Failed. Tried again. Failed again. Her husband looked desperate. "She has anxiety attacks." The flight attendant nodded nervously. Several passengers began watching. Some looked concerned. Others looked uncomfortable. Nobody knew what to do. Then Evelyn quietly unfastened her seatbelt. Jasmine immediately reached out. "Miss Evelyn, it's all right." She stood carefully. The flight attendant noticed her approaching. "Ma'am, please remain seated." Evelyn stopped. "I understand." Her voice remained calm. "But I think I can help." Something about her tone made the attendant pause. Not authority. Experience. The difference mattered. Evelyn slowly knelt beside the frightened woman. The older passenger's breathing remained erratic. Her eyes darted around the cabin, searching for danger, finding it everywhere. Evelyn spoke softly, not loudly enough for anyone else to hear. Only for the woman. "Hi." The woman looked at her. "My name is Evelyn." No response. "Can you tell me your name?" The woman swallowed. Helen. "Nice to meet you, Helen." The panic didn't disappear, but something shifted. The conversation gave Helen something to focus on, something other than fear. Evelyn continued. "My husband used to get nervous in hospitals. That part was true. Robert hated hospitals, even before cancer." Helen blinked. "He did?" "Oh, yes." Evelyn smiled gently. "He'd squeeze my hand so hard I'd lose feeling in my fingers." A tiny laugh escaped Helen. Unexpected. Small, but real. Several nearby passengers noticed. Evelyn continued talking. Nothing complicated. Nothing profound. Simple questions. Simple answers. Steady breathing. Steady eye contact. Steady presence. Minute by minute, Helen's panic began to ease. Her shoulders relaxed. The tension slowly left her face. The cabin seemed to exhale with her. Her husband looked close to tears. "Thank you." Evelyn squeezed his hand. "You're welcome." The flight attendant stood frozen, watching. Because she had spent years learning emergency procedures, yet somehow this 63-year-old woman had calmed the situation faster than any protocol. Not through training, through humanity. Back in first class, Ryan had witnessed everything. He couldn't stop staring. Every time Evelyn appeared in someone else's story, she became the hero of it, without trying, without announcing herself, without asking for recognition. The realization made his stomach twist even harder, because Lauren had looked at this woman and seen a problem. Ryan looked at her and saw the exact opposite. A few rows away, Claire Reynolds watched as well. Her eyes never left Evelyn. The shame she already carried deepened, because every minute that passed made her earlier silence look worse. Not better. Worse. She remembered the countless speeches she had given younger attorneys over the years. Speak when it matters. Stand up when it's difficult. Integrity is what you do when nobody is watching. How many times had she said those words? 100? 1,000? Yet when integrity demanded something from her today, she had failed. The thought settled heavily inside her chest. Meanwhile, Lauren remained near the galley, observing from a distance, arms crossed, expression unreadable. One of the attendants approached. That woman helped calm the passenger. Lauren glanced toward row 38. "So?" The attendant blinked. "So she seems..." She searched for the right word. "Kind." Lauren's expression hardened. "What does that have to do with anything?" The younger attendant fell silent. Lauren turned away. The conversation irritated her, not because she disagreed, because she didn't want to think about it. Acknowledging Evelyn's kindness created a problem. It forced Lauren to reconsider her judgment, and reconsidering judgments was something she rarely did. Far easier to double down. Far easier to convince herself she had been right. The plane leveled briefly before continuing its descent. Clouds drifted past the windows. The city below grew larger. Roads, buildings, tiny moving cars, life continuing as normal. Inside the aircraft, however, normal was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. The mood had changed. Passengers who ignored Evelyn earlier now watched her differently. The businessman who had laughed no longer looked comfortable. The elderly principal folded his newspaper and stared at the floor. Even people who hadn't witnessed the original confrontation sensed something unusual. A shift, a tension, a story unfolding beneath the surface. Near seat 2A, Marcus Whitmore remained silent. But he had watched everything. The panic attack, the comfort, the gratitude, the way his mother helped strangers as naturally as breathing. Some things never changed, not even after all these years. A memory surfaced. Marcus at age 12, walking home from school, finding an injured dog beneath a bridge. Most people kept moving. His mother hadn't. She spent 3 hours helping that animal. 3 hours. Despite having groceries melting in the car, despite having bills to pay, despite having every reason to leave. When Marcus asked why, she gave him the same answer she always gave. Because somebody should. The memory made him smile faintly. Those 3 words had shaped his life more than any business school ever could. Because somebody should. Not because it benefits you, not because anyone is watching. Because it's right. Marcus glanced toward row 38. His mother had no idea he was there. No idea he had seen everything. No idea what was coming. The thought filled him with equal parts pride and sadness. Pride because she remained exactly who she had always been. Sadness because the world still treated people like her this way. A soft chime sounded throughout the cabin. Final descent. Chicago now filled the windows. The skyline shimmered in the afternoon light. Passengers began collecting belongings. The flight was almost over. Lauren straightened her uniform. Ryan checked the galley one final time. Claire folded her hands nervously. Jasmine smiled toward Evelyn, and Marcus Whitmore quietly removed his phone one last time. A new message waited. The final report. He read it slowly. Every detail, every confirmation, every fact. Then he locked the screen. No emotion appeared on his face, but something had changed. A decision. Final. Certain. Unavoidable. The plane continued descending toward Chicago. And for the first time all day, Marcus looked directly toward the front exit of the aircraft. Because in less than 20 minutes, the flight would end. And when it did, Lauren Mitchell would finally learn exactly who she had humiliated, and why some mistakes change everything. The wheels touched the runway with a soft thump. A few passengers looked up from their phones. Others barely noticed. The aircraft rolled smoothly along the tarmac as Chicago spread beyond the windows in shades of steel, glass, and afternoon sunlight. The flight was over. Or at least that was what most people believed. Seatbelt signs remained illuminated. Passengers waited impatiently. Some checked watches. Others prepared messages for family members waiting at home. The familiar restlessness of arrival filled the cabin. Lauren Mitchell stood near the front exit. Her uniform was perfect. Her smile had returned. The professional smile. The airline smile. The one she had practiced thousands of times. The one passengers expected. The one that revealed absolutely nothing. As far as Lauren was concerned, Flight 271 had become just another workday. An unpleasant passenger issue. A small delay. A solved problem. Nothing more. The aircraft finally reached the gate. Outside the windows, ground crews moved into position. The jet bridge slowly connected. A soft chime sounded. The seatbelt sign disappeared. Immediately, people stood. Overhead bins opened. Bags shifted. Conversations resumed. The ordinary chaos of arrival began. Lauren moved to her position beside the aircraft door. "Thank you for flying Skybridge Airways." The words came automatically. Passenger after passenger moved forward. A businessman. A family with children. An elderly couple. Lauren smiled at each one. "Have a wonderful day. Thank you for choosing Skybridge. We appreciate your business." Everything appeared normal. Yet several people in first class seemed distracted. Claire Reynolds remained seated longer than necessary. The businessman who had laughed earlier avoided looking toward row 38. Ryan stood near the galley, unusually quiet, and the man in seat 2A had not moved. Not yet. Lauren noticed, briefly, but thought nothing of it. Eventually, the first-class cabin emptied. Only a handful of passengers remained. Claire, Ryan, the businessman, several others gathering belongings, and the man in seat 2A. At last he stood, slowly, calmly, without any sign of urgency. He reached into the overhead compartment and removed a simple black carry-on bag. No designer labels, no flashy luggage, nothing that drew attention. The businessman across the aisle watched him carefully. Something about the man still felt familiar, still felt important. The quiet passenger adjusted the strap on his shoulder. Then he removed his baseball cap. For the first time all flight, his face was fully visible. Ryan froze. The businessman froze. Even Claire looked up. Recognition flashed through the cabin. Not instant recognition. Not for everyone. But enough. Enough to make people pause. The man's face appeared regularly in financial magazines, corporate interviews, business journals, industry conferences. He wasn't a celebrity, not the kind people screamed over, but within aviation, his face was impossible to mistake. Ryan felt his stomach drop. No. No way. The quiet passenger stepped toward the exit. Lauren smiled automatically. "Thank you for flying with us, sir." The man stopped. He did not step into the jet bridge. He did not move aside. Instead, he looked directly at Lauren. For the first time all day, she felt uncomfortable, not because of anything he said, because of the way he looked at her. Calm, controlled, certain. The kind of certainty that made excuses impossible. "Is there a problem, sir?" Lauren asked. The smile on her face weakened slightly. The man reached into his jacket pocket, removed a leather credential holder, and opened it. Ryan stopped breathing. Claire's eyes widened. The businessman visibly paled. Lauren looked down, then looked again. Her smile disappeared, completely. The identification badge displayed a name, a title, a photograph. Marcus Whitmore, Chief Executive Officer, Skybridge Airways. For 1 second, Lauren couldn't process what she was seeing. The letters blurred. The words refused to make sense. CEO. Her CEO. Standing directly in front of her. On this flight. In this cabin. Watching. The entire time. Color drained from her face. Mr. Whitmore. Ryan looked away. The businessman stared at the floor. Nobody spoke. The air itself seemed frozen. Marcus closed the credential holder. His voice remained calm, almost gentle. Yes, Lauren. The fact that he knew her name made things worse. Far worse.
Sir,
Lauren swallowed. I didn't realize. No. Marcus nodded. I know you didn't. Silence followed. Heavy, uncomfortable, unavoidable. The remaining passengers could feel it. The cabin suddenly seemed much smaller, much quieter. Lauren attempted a nervous smile. I hope you enjoyed your flight. The words sounded absurd the moment they left her mouth. Marcus did not smile. Instead, he looked past her, toward the rear of the aircraft, toward economy, toward row 38. Then he returned his attention to Lauren. The woman you removed from seat 1D. Lauren's heart skipped. Every sound inside the cabin disappeared. Ryan lowered his head. Claire covered her mouth. The businessman closed his eyes. Nobody wanted to be standing there. Nobody wanted to hear what came next. But nobody could leave. Marcus continued. The woman you publicly embarrassed. Lauren's hands trembled slightly. The woman you accused of not belonging. The cabin remained silent. Lauren opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Mr. Whitmore, I can explain. No. The word stopped her immediately. Not loud, not angry, just final. Marcus took one step closer. Not aggressively, not threateningly, just enough to remove any distance between truth and denial. No, Lauren. He looked directly into her eyes. You don't need to explain. The silence deepened, because suddenly everyone understood. This wasn't about policy. This wasn't about tickets. This wasn't about seating assignments. It was something much bigger, much more personal. Marcus glanced once more toward the back of the aircraft, then spoke the sentence that changed everything. The woman sitting in row 38. Lauren's breathing stopped. Ryan felt his pulse hammering. Claire's eyes filled with tears. The businessman stared helplessly. Marcus finished the sentence. Is my mother. The words hit the cabin like a wave. Nobody moved. Nobody blinked. Nobody spoke. For a moment it felt as though time itself had stopped. Lauren simply stared, unable to process what she had heard. Mother. His mother. The woman in the old sweater. The woman with the worn leather bag. The woman she had removed from first class. His mother. The realization struck with devastating force. Every assumption, every judgment, every decision collapsed at once. Ryan physically leaned against the galley wall for support. Claire lowered her head. A tear slipped down her cheek. The businessman looked sick. Marcus never raised his voice. That somehow made everything worse. Because anger can be dismissed. Calm truth cannot. Lauren's lips trembled. I didn't know. Marcus looked at her for several seconds, then answered quietly. That's exactly the problem. The words landed harder than any accusation, because deep down everyone knew he was right. Lauren hadn't known. She hadn't asked. She hadn't checked. She hadn't cared. She had looked at Evelyn Brooks and decided who she was in less than 30 seconds. And now the consequences of that decision stood directly in front of her. Wearing a gray hoodie, holding a CEO badge, and carrying the weight of every moment he had silently witnessed. From seat 2A. The flight was over, but the real story had only just begun. For several long seconds, nobody moved. The aircraft cabin seemed frozen in place. Outside the windows, baggage carts rolled across the tarmac. Ground crews signaled to one another. Passengers from neighboring flights walked through nearby jet bridges. Life continued normally. Inside Flight 271, nothing felt normal anymore. Lauren Mitchell stared at Marcus Whitmore. Her mind raced desperately through every moment of the flight. Every word, every glance, every decision. His mother, the woman in seat 38, the woman she had judged within seconds, the woman she had removed from first class, the woman she had humiliated in front of an entire cabin. His mother. Lauren swallowed hard. Mr. Whitmore, if I had known. Marcus shook his head. The movement was small, but it stopped her immediately. If you had known what? Lauren opened her mouth. No answer came. Marcus continued quietly. If you had known she was related to me? Silence. If you had known she had influence? Silence. If you had known she mattered. The words landed heavily. Lauren lowered her eyes, because suddenly every possible defense sounded worse than saying nothing. Marcus glanced around the cabin. Ryan stood motionless near the galley. Claire remained seated. Several passengers still lingered in the aisle. Nobody seemed willing to leave. Everyone knew they were witnessing something important. Something bigger than a disagreement over a seat. Marcus spoke again. My mother offered to show her receipt. Lauren said nothing. She offered to show her confirmation. Still nothing. She offered proof. Marcus took another breath. You never looked. Lauren felt heat rising into her face, because every word was true. Every single one. Ryan lowered his gaze. He remembered it all. The confirmation email, the receipt, the boarding pass, the opportunities Lauren had ignored. Marcus turned toward Officer Davis, who had remained near the aircraft entrance. The security officer looked uncomfortable. Very uncomfortable. Officer. Davis straightened immediately. Yes, sir. When my mother told you she had proof, did you examine it? The officer hesitated. No, sir. Did you verify her ticket? No, sir. Did you ask the gate agent? No, sir. Marcus nodded slowly. The disappointment in his expression seemed harder to endure than anger. So you removed a passenger without confirming any facts? Davis lowered his head. Yes, sir. Nobody spoke, because there was nothing to argue with. The truth stood there in plain sight. Simple, undeniable, uncomfortable. Ryan suddenly stepped forward. His voice trembled slightly. Mr. Whitmore. Marcus turned. Ryan swallowed, then reached into the galley compartment. He carefully removed Evelyn's leather bag. The old brown leather looked strangely important now, not because of what it was, because of who it belonged to. I need to tell you something. Marcus waited. Ryan opened the bag, removed the photograph, and handed it over. Marcus looked at it. His expression softened immediately. The gala, the chandeliers, the black evening gown, his mother's smile, his own arm around her shoulders. The memory hit him unexpectedly. That had been the night Skybridge received a National Customer Service Award. Thousands of employees, hundreds of executives, reporters, cameras, awards. Yet the only thing his mother remembered afterward was helping a nervous waiter who had accidentally dropped a tray. That was who Evelyn Brooks was. Always. Ryan spoke quietly. I found this after she was moved. Marcus looked up. I should have said something. Ryan's voice cracked. I knew it was wrong. The words filled the cabin. Raw, honest, painful. Marcus studied him carefully, for several seconds, then nodded once. Not forgiveness, not condemnation. Just acknowledgement. Ryan looked relieved and ashamed at the same time. Claire Reynolds suddenly stood. Everyone looked toward her. The attorney took a slow breath, then looked directly at Marcus. I owe your mother an apology. Her voice shook slightly. I saw everything. Marcus remained silent. Claire continued. I knew it was wrong. The words sounded familiar, almost identical to Ryan's, but I didn't speak. She looked toward the floor. I spent 35 years telling people to stand up when something matters. A bitter laugh escaped her. Turns out advice is easier to give than follow. The confession hung heavily in the air, because it wasn't only hers. It belonged to nearly everyone on the plane. The businessman who had laughed, the passengers who watched, the people who looked away, the people who convinced themselves it wasn't their responsibility. Marcus listened quietly, then looked around the cabin. Every face carried some version of the same emotion. Regret. Not because they got caught, because they knew better, and did nothing. Finally, Marcus spoke. My mother isn't sitting in row 38 because one person failed. The words drew everyone's attention. She's sitting there because a lot of people failed. Nobody argued. Because nobody could. The cabin became silent once more. Then Marcus turned away. Without another word, he started walking. Not toward the jet bridge, not toward the exit. Toward the back of the aircraft. Past first class. Past the curtain. Past the rows of passengers gathering their belongings. Word spread instantly. People recognized him now. Whispers followed. Eyes widened. Phones lowered. Conversations stopped. Marcus Whitmore ignored all of it. His focus remained fixed on one person. Row 38. Evelyn Brooks sat exactly where he had last seen her. Hands folded, back straight, patient as always. She still didn't know. Still had no idea her son had witnessed everything. Still believed she was arriving in Chicago for a birthday celebration. Nothing more. Jasmine noticed Marcus first. Her eyes widened. She recognized him immediately. Everyone in Chicago knew who Marcus Whitmore was. The airline CEO, business leader, philanthropist, magazine covers, television interviews. He walked directly toward row 38. Jasmine looked from Marcus to Evelyn, then back again. Confusion spread across her face. The passengers nearby noticed as well. One by one, conversations faded. A strange silence followed Marcus down the aisle. When he finally reached row 38, he stopped. For a moment, he simply stood there, looking at his mother, the woman who had spent decades sacrificing for him, working extra shifts, skipping meals, putting his future ahead of her own. The woman who had given away her scarf that very morning to a homeless veteran because she couldn't bear seeing someone cold. The woman who had been humiliated and still spent the flight comforting strangers. Marcus felt emotion rise unexpectedly in his chest. Evelyn looked up. At first she seemed confused. Then her eyes widened. Marcus? A smile immediately appeared. The same smile from the photograph. Warm, proud, unconditional. My baby. Marcus laughed softly. Even now, even after becoming CEO, even after building a billion-dollar company, he was still her baby. Always would be. What are you doing here? She asked. The surrounding passengers listened carefully. Marcus knelt beside her seat. Right there in the aisle. The CEO of Skybridge Airways kneeling in economy class. The sight stunned everyone who witnessed it, including Lauren, standing frozen near the front. Marcus took Evelyn's hand, then smiled. Come on, Mama. Evelyn blinked. What? He squeezed her hand gently. Let's go home. For the first time all day, tears filled Evelyn's eyes. Not from humiliation, not from sadness. Relief. The kind of relief that arrives when someone finally sees your pain without needing it explained. Marcus reached beneath the seat, pulled out her leather bag, placed the strap over his shoulder, then carefully helped her stand. The entire cabin watched. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Because at that moment, everyone understood something. The woman Lauren had treated as though she didn't belong wasn't important because she was the CEO's mother. She was important long before that. The revelation simply made it impossible to ignore. Marcus placed an arm around her shoulders. Together they began walking toward the front of the aircraft. past row after row of silent passengers, past people carrying guilt, past people carrying regret, past people carrying lessons they would never forget. And waiting near the aircraft door stood Lauren Mitchell, watching them approach, knowing there was nowhere left to hide from the truth. Lauren Mitchell felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Not embarrassment, not fear. Shame. Real shame. The kind that arrives when every excuse collapses. The kind that leaves you standing alone with your own reflection. Marcus and Evelyn walked slowly toward the front of the aircraft. Mother and son. Neither hurried. Neither spoke. The silence itself carried more weight than any confrontation could have. Passengers stepped aside automatically, creating space, lowering their eyes, watching history unfold in a place as ordinary as an airplane aisle. Claire Reynolds remained near the front. She couldn't bring herself to leave. Not yet. The businessman who had laughed earlier stood frozen beside the overhead bins. His face had lost all color. The confidence he carried during the flight was gone, replaced by something uncomfortable. Recognition. Not of Marcus, of himself. Because for the first time all day, he was forced to confront a reality he had spent years avoiding. The problem wasn't only Lauren. It was everyone who quietly agreed with her. Everyone who assumed. Everyone who watched. Everyone who stayed comfortable. Including him. Marcus stopped several feet from Lauren. Evelyn stood beside him. Only then did she fully understand what had happened. Not the humiliation. Not the flight. She already understood those things. What she hadn't realized was that Marcus had witnessed everything. Every second. Every word. Her eyes moved from Marcus to Lauren, then back again. Baby. Marcus smiled softly. I'm okay, Mama. The answer surprised her. Because she knew her son. She knew how protective he could be, especially when someone hurt family. Yet there was no anger in his voice, only disappointment. The same disappointment she herself had felt all day. Lauren finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Mrs. Brooks. Evelyn looked at her. Lauren swallowed. No rehearsed statement appeared. No corporate language. No carefully constructed defense. Only the truth. I was wrong. The words seemed difficult for her to say. Perhaps because they were. I judged you. Silence. I didn't verify anything. Silence. I made assumptions. Still silence. Lauren lowered her eyes. I am sorry. No one moved. No one interrupted. The cabin listened, waiting, watching. Evelyn studied her for several seconds, not with anger, not with triumph, simply looking. The way teachers look at students who finally admit a mistake. The way parents look at children learning a difficult lesson. Then Evelyn nodded once, a small gesture, nothing dramatic. Yet Lauren's shoulders relaxed slightly, not because she had been forgiven, because she had finally stopped pretending. Marcus turned toward Ryan. The young flight attendant immediately straightened. His nerves were obvious, his face pale, his hands trembling slightly. Marcus approached him. Ryan spoke first. I should have done something. The confession came immediately. No excuses, no hesitation. I knew she had a valid ticket. Marcus remained silent. Ryan continued. I knew it wasn't right. His voice cracked. But I was scared. The words hung heavily in the cabin. Because fear was honest, fear explained things, but it didn't erase them. Ryan looked down. I kept telling myself somebody else would speak. Marcus nodded slowly. And did they? Ryan closed his eyes. No. The answer hurt because everyone knew it was true. Nobody had spoken. Not Ryan. Not Claire. Not the businessman. Not the passengers. Nobody. Marcus looked around the aircraft. The remaining passengers avoided eye contact, each carrying their own version of guilt. Then Claire stepped forward. I owe Mrs. Brooks an apology too. Evelyn turned toward her. Claire inhaled deeply. The practiced confidence of a courtroom attorney was gone. In its place stood a woman confronting herself. I saw what happened. She paused. I knew it was wrong. The familiar sentence echoed once again, like a refrain throughout the flight. I knew it was wrong. Ryan had said it. The businessman silently admitted it. Now Claire said it too. I spent my entire career fighting injustice. A bitter smile appeared, and somehow I couldn't manage one sentence. Her eyes filled. I am ashamed of that. Evelyn walked closer. For a moment, Claire looked confused. Then Evelyn gently touched her arm. Not punishment. Not judgment. Compassion. The gesture nearly broke Claire completely, because kindness often hurts more than anger, especially when you know you don't deserve it. Meanwhile, Officer Davis remained near the aircraft entrance, quiet, thoughtful. He replayed every moment of the confrontation, the request for proof, the boarding pass, the confidence in Lauren's voice, his own decision to trust authority without verification. The training manuals suddenly felt very distant, very inadequate, because rules were easy. Responsibility was harder, far harder. Marcus eventually spoke again. His voice carried through the cabin. Not loud, yet impossible to ignore. My mother spent her life helping people. Everyone listened. Community kitchens. He glanced toward Evelyn. Food drives. Another glance. Neighborhood programs. A faint smile appeared. She once spent 3 hours helping an injured dog she found under a bridge. A few passengers smiled despite themselves. Marcus nodded. That's who she is. The silence that followed felt different, warmer, more human. Then he continued. And today she spent this flight comforting strangers. The elderly couple nodded immediately. Jasmine did too. The frightened little girl waved from several rows back. People began remembering the panic attack, the stories, the kindness, the bottle of water, the quiet strength. Marcus looked directly at Lauren. You didn't see any of that. Lauren lowered her head. No. You saw a sweater. Silence. You saw an old bag. Silence. You saw what you expected to see. Lauren's eyes filled with tears, because there was no arguing with truth. None at all. Outside the aircraft, airport activity continued. Baggage loaders worked. Fuel trucks moved. Announcements echoed faintly through the terminal. Ordinary life. Yet inside Flight 271, something extraordinary was happening. People were confronting themselves, perhaps for the first time in years. Eventually, airport staff began gently encouraging remaining passengers to deplane. The moment could not last forever. Reality waited outside. Investigations, reports, consequences, conversations, the future. Marcus knew all of that was coming. In fact, much of it had already begun. While the flight taxied to the gate, compliance teams had received notifications. Crew records were being reviewed. Passenger statements would be collected. Procedures examined. Questions asked. Hard questions. Necessary questions. Lauren knew it too. The realization showed plainly on her face. Her career had changed today, whether she wanted it to or not. Ryan understood his future might change as well. Claire knew she would carry this lesson for years. Even the businessman suspected he would remember this flight far longer than he wanted. Everyone was leaving with something. Regret, responsibility, perspective, a lesson. Finally, Evelyn looked at Marcus. My birthday trip sure turned exciting. The unexpected comment drew a few surprised laughs. Even Marcus laughed. The tension broke slightly. Only slightly. But enough. Because that was Evelyn. Even after everything. Still finding room for grace. Still making space for people to breathe. Marcus shook his head. You always do that. Do what? Make everybody feel better. Evelyn smiled. Somebody should. The words stopped Marcus cold. The exact same words she had spoken years ago beside an injured dog. The same words she lived by. The same words that explained everything. Somebody should. Neither realized several people nearby heard them. Ryan heard. Claire heard. Lauren heard. And those three words stayed with each of them. Long after the aircraft emptied, long after the reports were written, long after the headlines faded, because deep down, every person on Flight 271 now understood the real question wasn't what Lauren had done. It wasn't what Marcus would do next. It wasn't even who Evelyn Brooks was. The real question was much simpler. When the next moment arrived, when the next stranger needed help, when the next injustice happened right in front of them, would they finally become the somebody who should? The question followed everyone off Flight 271. It followed Ryan Sullivan into the employee parking lot. It followed Claire Reynolds into the back seat of her waiting car. It followed Officer Davis through the airport terminal. And it followed Lauren Mitchell all the way home. Because some days end when you walk away, and some days stay with you forever. This was one of those days. 3 days later, Skybridge Airways headquarters stood beneath a clear Chicago sky. The glass tower reflected sunlight across downtown streets crowded with taxis, office workers, and tourists. Inside the building, however, the atmosphere was anything but ordinary. Meetings had begun before sunrise. Compliance teams reviewed reports. Human resources conducted interviews. Passenger statements arrived. Video footage was examined. Nothing was being ignored. Nothing was being rushed. Marcus Whitmore made certain of that. Not because Evelyn was his mother. Because what happened should never have happened to anyone. The findings came quickly. Too quickly. Lauren Mitchell had accumulated 3 previous complaints over 7 years. Different passengers. Different flights. The same pattern. Assumptions. Judgments. Unnecessary scrutiny. Each complaint had been documented. Each complaint had been quietly resolved. Each complaint had been forgotten. Until now. Ryan learned this during an internal review meeting. The information left him stunned. Not because Lauren had made mistakes, because nobody had addressed them. Nobody had stopped them. The system itself had remained silent, just like the passengers on Flight 271. Marcus noticed the irony immediately. Sometimes organizations behaved exactly like people. They saw problems, recognized them, then looked away. Across town, Claire Reynolds sat alone in her office. A blank document glowed on her computer screen. For nearly 20 minutes, she simply stared at it. Then she began typing. The statement eventually reached 4 pages. Every detail, every observation, every uncomfortable truth. The final paragraph took longest. She rewrote it 6 times, deleted it twice, then finally left it exactly as written. I saw a woman being treated unfairly and chose comfort over courage. That failure belongs to me. I hope admitting it is the first step toward becoming better than I was that day." Claire submitted the statement, then sat quietly. The confession brought no relief. Growth rarely does at first. Meanwhile, Ryan made a decision of his own, one that surprised everyone, including himself. He requested a transfer, not to another route, not to another city, to training. When his supervisor asked why, Ryan gave a simple answer. "I never want another employee standing where I stood." The supervisor stared. Ryan continued. "I knew something was wrong." Silence. "I just didn't know how to speak." The transfer request was approved 2 weeks later. Across Chicago, another conversation was taking place. Marcus sat across from his mother at a small restaurant overlooking the river. The birthday dinner that almost never happened. Soft jazz played in the background. Sunlight reflected off the water outside. For the first time since the flight, they were alone. No reporters, no executives, no lawyers. Just mother and son. Exactly the way Evelyn preferred it. Marcus set down his coffee. "I can terminate her." Evelyn looked up. "Lauren?" He nodded. "Immediately." The statement carried no anger, only certainty. The option existed. Few people would question it. Many would support it. Evelyn stirred her tea quietly, then smiled. "You know what your problem is?" Marcus laughed. "I have one. You got it from your father." That made him smile. "What is it?" "You think consequences and revenge are the same thing." Marcus leaned back. The comment caught him off guard. Evelyn continued. "People need consequences." She nodded. "Absolutely." Another sip of tea. "But revenge doesn't teach anybody." Marcus remained silent, listening. The same way he had his entire life whenever his mother spoke about important things. "Did Lauren hurt me?" "Yes." "Was she wrong?" "Yes." "Should there be accountability?" "Yes." She smiled gently. "All three can be true." Marcus stared out the window. The river moved slowly beneath afternoon sunlight. People crossed nearby bridges. Life continued, just as it always did. "What would you do?" he asked. Evelyn considered the question, then answered, "I'd make sure she learns." 6 months later, the entire airline industry was talking about something called the Brooks Promise. Not the Whitmore Initiative, not the CEO program, the Brooks Promise. Evelyn insisted on the name. If people were going to remember anything, she wanted them remembering the lesson, not the executive. The lesson. The program became mandatory across Skybridge Airways. Flight attendants, gate agents, customer service representatives, ground crews, managers, executives, everyone. The training focused on something surprisingly simple. See the person before the assumption. The phrase appeared in every presentation, every workshop, every training room, every employee handbook revision. Marcus personally funded the first phase, yet he rarely appeared during sessions. The person employees wanted to hear was Evelyn, and eventually she agreed. The first training session took place in a conference room overlooking downtown Chicago. 200 employees filled the room, some curious, some skeptical, some nervous. Evelyn stood at the front wearing the same style of cream-colored sweater she had worn on Flight 271. No fancy speech, no corporate presentation, no teleprompter. Just honesty. She looked around the room, then began, "I'm not here because of what happened to me." The room became quiet. "I'm here because of what happens to people who don't have a son sitting nearby." Nobody moved. Nobody checked phones. Nobody whispered. Because everyone understood exactly what she meant. The woman in seat 38 wasn't special. She smiled softly. That's the point. The lesson landed immediately, because dignity should never depend on connections, or influence, or wealth, or status. It should belong to everyone. At the back of the room, Ryan listened carefully. He never missed a session, not one. He eventually became one of the program's lead facilitators. Every class opened the same way, every time. I'm Ryan Sullivan. Pause. I watched something wrong happen and stayed quiet. Another pause. Don't be me. The simplicity made it powerful. Elsewhere, Claire Reynolds began volunteering twice a month with the Travelers' Rights Organization. She helped passengers navigate complaints, disputes, mistreatment, situations many people lacked resources to address alone. Whenever someone asked why she volunteered, her answer never changed. I learned what silence costs, and Lauren Mitchell, her story surprised everyone, including her. Skybridge did not simply erase her. Instead, she was removed from flight duties and placed into an intensive rehabilitation and education program tied directly to the Brooks promise. It was not comfortable, it was not easy, and it was not quick. For months, she worked with community organizations, veteran outreach programs, shelters, food banks, neighborhood service groups, places she had spent years overlooking. One afternoon, she arrived at a veteran support center on Chicago's South Side. Rain tapped softly against the windows. Volunteers moved between tables carrying meals. Lauren looked around the room, then froze, because standing near the serving line was a familiar face. Thomas, the veteran Evelyn had helped on the morning of the flight. The scarf still hung around his neck. Lauren recognized it instantly. Thomas recognized her too. Neither spoke for several seconds. Then Thomas smiled, not because he approved of what happened, because bitterness had never improved anyone. Lauren spent that afternoon serving meals, listening, learning, really listening, perhaps for the first time in years. Months later, she wrote Evelyn a letter, handwritten, 3 pages, no lawyers, no public relations team, no corporate language, just honesty. The final sentence read, "Thank you for refusing to become the person I expected you to become." Evelyn responded with 6 sentences. The final one read, "If you learned something, then the pain wasn't wasted." 1 year after Flight 271, every Skybridge crew lounge displayed a framed sign, yellow background, blue lettering, simple words. The same words that once hung in a neighborhood community center where Evelyn volunteered. Every person matters. No exceptions. Employees passed it every day. Some barely noticed. Others stopped and read it. A few remembered exactly why it was there. And on quiet afternoons, when sunlight streamed through terminal windows and passengers hurried toward gates, someone occasionally asked about the sign. Then another employee would tell the story. Not about a CEO, not about a first-class seat, not even about an airline. They told the story of a woman in an old sweater carrying a worn leather bag, a woman who gave away her scarf to a homeless veteran, a woman who comforted frightened strangers after being humiliated herself, a woman who proved that dignity cannot be assigned by a boarding pass, and that belonging is not something another person gets to decide. Evelyn Brooks boarded Flight 271 as a passenger. She left it as something much bigger, a reminder that kindness still matters, that silence has a cost, and that sometimes the strongest person in the room is the one everyone underestimated. Every person matters. No exceptions. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment.
What would you have done if you were sitting on flight 271 that day? The moment that stayed with me isn't when Margaret Whitmore revealed he was the CEO. It's when Evelyn Brooks, after everything she endured, still chose to tell her son, if you learn something, then the pen wasn't weighted. That single sentence says more about her character than any title or first-class seat ever could. The real lesson here is about the cost of prejudice and the courage it takes to fight our own mistakes. Lawrence's greatest concern wasn't being exposed, it was finally seeing the person he had refused to see. Today, think about one person you've already made up your mind about. Maybe give them a second look, the way people should have looked at Evelyn. Sometimes the most important thing you can do isn't speak louder, it's see someone more clearly. If Evelyn's story moved you, comment one below. And if you ever been judged before someone took the time to know you, comment 0. In the next story, we meet someone else who seemed invisible to the world until one unexpected moment changed everything.